Namaskar and welcome to this special presentation on DD India. I'm Shubhendra Ghosh. Prime Minister Narendra Modi is about to reach London for an official visit to the United Kingdom. There is great anticipation around the UK-India Free Trade Agreement. Prime Minister Modi will also engage with top leadership of the UK, including King Charles III and Prime Minister Keir Starmer. UK is also home to a thriving Indian diaspora as Prime Minister Modi begins the historic visit. We'll deliberate on all aspects of this vibrant partnership. Let's begin. Prime Minister Narendra Modi is reaching London shortly on a visit to the United Kingdom. He will be in the UK from July 23rd to 24th. This is his fourth visit to the United Kingdom. During his visit, Prime Minister Modi will hold talks with his British counterpart, Keir Starmer, and also meet King Charles III. And Prime Minister Modi's UK visit aims to strengthen bilateral ties between India and the United Kingdom. The two nations became comprehensive strategic partners in 2021, and this visit is expected to be another occasion to further enhance the already extensive bilateral relations.
India and United Kingdom ties extend through centuries, but of late have been scaling new heights. Trade neared $55 billion in 2023-24, and cooperation in the fields of energy, security, technology, climate, and other critical areas has also been rising. All aspects of the relations are expected to get a fresh fillip now with Prime Minister's latest visit.
This will be Prime Minister's fourth visit to the United Kingdom since assuming office. He has visited previously in 2015 and 2018, and he was there in 2021 for the COP26 summit in Glasgow.
India and the UK have also been working on an over 2,000-page long trade pact since 2022. On the 6th of May, the Prime Ministers of two nations had announced the conclusion of all negotiations, indicating that a formalization is close at hand. During his two-day UK stay, Prime Minister Modi will call on King Charles III, and he will also meet business representatives while having an informal interaction with members of the Indian diaspora.
A review of the comprehensive strategic partnership is also on the cards, but in times of conflict as well as tariff and trade tensions, when the leaders of the two major democracies in the world will meet, it will also send out a clear message of openness, cooperation and stability. With camera person Sanjay Jaina, Gautam Roy, London, UK, DD India.
Prime Minister Modi is on a two-day visit to the United Kingdom. Starting Wednesday, he'll be calling on King Charles III and holding bilateral meeting with his UK counterpart, Keir Starmer, on Thursday. DD India's Gautam Roy has spoken with India's High Commissioner to the UK, Vikram Doraiswamy, about the strategic partnership between the two nations.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi is on his fourth visit to the United Kingdom from the 23rd to the 24th of July. India and the UK have extensive relations. This is a comprehensive bilateral partnership. How is it going to be expanded further this time round? Let's find out from Vikram Doraiswamy. He's India's High Commissioner to the UK. Thank you for joining us, High Commissioner. What can you tell us about the agenda this time round for the Prime Minister?
Well, this is a short but very focused visit. The Prime Minister's agenda is really to push the relationship to the next level. The focus is on essentially taking forward the relationship on core verticals that we see as forward-looking, futuristic pillars of the relationship. So that includes the technology domain, where the UK and India have been strong partners on something called the Technology Security Initiative, which was launched last year. We are also partners on developing our trade relationship, which has been growing along at a pretty steady pace. We also look at education as a major part of the mix. As you probably know, not only do we have a large number of students here, we also have the largest number possibly of universities opening campuses in India from the UK. I think the idea that India is now open for partnerships with quality universities to meet the enormous demand for high quality education that Indians have traditionally had, I think that's an important part of the piece.
The India-UK Trade Pact has been in the works since 2022, and there's been a lot of speculation around it. Is it on the anvil this time around in this trip, the formalization of it?
Well, look, I mean, the trade ministers announced the completion of formal negotiations. We are engaged in a last-minute sprint to complete all of the legal scrubbing and paperwork that goes into it. Let's not anticipate what the Prime Minister will do. Let the Prime Minister come here and then we'll take that forward.
All in all, what kind of a message do you think the leaders of these two countries, two democracies, which have extensive links, not just through the present times, but going back centuries, would be sending out to the world in the kind of times that we live in, where you not only have conflicts in different parts of the world and all kinds of barriers coming up, even when it comes to the movement of people, and India and UK have very vibrant ties there, 1.8 billion strong diaspora here.
I think the message that we'd like to convey, that the leadership would like to convey, is that fourth largest economy in the world and the sixth largest economy in the world are doing business together, that we see the process of making it easier to do business, making it easier to invest in each other's country, making it easier for legal and practical means of having qualified people travel to each other's countries and thereby support businesses. All of these are good things, and that's a message in and of itself.
Great. Thank you for speaking to DD India, High Commissioner.
Thank you so much for having me.
The UK has a 1.8 million strong Indian diaspora, which is looking forward to Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit. DD India correspondent Gautam Roy spoke with Lord Rayner, member, House of Lords, well-known businessman of Indian origin and a Conservative Party politician, about the expectations of the Indian community in the UK with Prime Minister Modi's upcoming trip to London.
Narendra Modi is on his fourth visit to the UK since 2014. On the 23rd and the 24th of July, and a lot of anticipation is built into this visit. With us is Lord Rayner of Mayfair to talk about it. What can you tell us about your assessment of the tie so far, and what do you expect from this visit?
This will be a mother of all trade deals, because this will be between the oldest democracy and the largest democracies of the world, sharing equal values.
Is that sort of a message that you expect the two leaders to send out as well when Prime Minister Modi meets Prime Minister Starmer?
Well, India is playing already a very important role in fighting against terrorism. The Quad is a proof that they value India's security. India is doing what the civilized world want to do. So therefore, the Prime Minister Starmer will be overjoyed to receive Prime Minister Modi, the most popular and the most decorated Prime Minister in the world, who has been honored not only by Shia Iran but also Sunni Saudi Arabia. That just shows you diplomacy. He's not only respected by Putin, but he's also respected by Trump. Yes. So two rivals, they envy. That just shows that we play the center stage. We don't want to join any groups. We are master of our own destiny, and therefore our contribution to the world will be balanced, collaborated, and just equitable. For the last 10 years, ever since Modi come, we say with proud, I'm Indian. Wow. Everybody now says, I'm Indian. Even the Pakistani friends say we're Indian.
Well, let's hope that Prime Minister Modi this time around, along with his counterpart Keir Starmer, lead to a more heady and fruitful relationship between India and the United Kingdom. With cameraperson Jaina, Gautam Roy, London, DD India.
And let's now dive deeper into the context of the India-UK relations as Prime Minister Narendra Modi is about to reach London. Let me invite our special guest for the program, Ambassador Sanjay Bhattacharya, former Secretary MEA. Also joining us is Professor Harshvardhan Pant, Vice President, Observer Research Foundation, ORF. Warm welcome to both of you. Ambassador Bhattacharya, if I can begin with you. Linkages between India and the United Kingdom are centuries old, from the colonial legacy to more pragmatic modern partnership of democracies. How has this relationship evolved And where does it stand today? If you can begin with that, sir.
Well, I think Prime Minister is going on what I think is a milestone visit, because this really signifies our desire on both sides to take this to the next level. A partnership that is future-oriented, that looks at the kind of collaboration that is useful for our economies, for our peoples, the citizens, and also one that has a strategic bearing, keeping in mind our close cooperation, not only bilaterally, but also in the Indo-Pacific. So I think this is going to be a very comprehensive visit, although it's going to be a relatively short one, in which he'll have interaction with the Prime Minister of the UK, as well as have a meeting with King Charles III. He will also have a business engagement, and that will basically focus on the key areas that Prime Minister and India are looking forward to developing.
Right. Professor Pant, your opening thoughts, before we talk about Prime Minister's visit. What makes India-UK ties unique in India's larger communication and engagement with the West and Europe in particular?
I think, historically, India and the UK have had, a relationship that has been quite unique because of the people-to-people dimension that it encompasses. And that certainly has been the driving force in this relationship. And I think what we are now looking at making this relationship more relevant to 21st century realities is also based on that dimension that whether you look at technology issues, education-related issues, all of them today look very, very different from where India is coming from and where UK is. And I think in some ways, UK is looking for or is still struggling with a foreign policy agenda post-Brexit. And an engagement with India, a more robust economic engagement with India, which in some ways the FTA and conclusion of that FTA would signify, would be a big marker of UK's desire to arrive at that consensus that takes it beyond its traditional partners in Europe. So I think UK is also looking at India as today as a rising economic power, as a country that needs to be engaged with on its own terms. India is looking at UK again as a country, while part of Europe, but also distinct in more ways than one. Also the relationship being driven bottom up and top down together. And therefore, for both of them to come to terms with each other on economic matters would be an important benchmark for the rest of the world as we pass through a lot of geopolitical and geoeconomic uncertainty and volatility. I think the relationship, as it has grown, as the ambitious agenda that has been laid out by the two leaders of the two nations, I think certainly is an important element inducing a certain predictability between two major economies, between two major economic centers of power, and also two countries which are today increasingly at the cutting edge of innovation and technology development. So I do think that this relationship is unique and important, and the nurturing of this relationship has been part of Prime Minister Modi's agenda for Europe over the last decade. And I think this is, in some ways, this visit would see a culmination of that, of all the efforts that have been made in that regard over the last decade.
Right. Ambassador Bhattacharya, taking that point of the FTA, there is great anticipation around the free trade agreement between India and the United Kingdom. How do you see it as a game changer for trade and economic ties between the two nations broadly?
Well, since the multilateral system is in flux, it has become even more important to have these bilateral arrangements. Of course, India and the UK share a very special and unique economic partnership, which goes back in history, but is now being refashioned according to the modern context. India has recently become the fifth largest economy in the world and is also the fastest growing major economy. So there is a strong vested interest on both sides to try and have as many drivers for the economic growth. Now, the India-UK economic FTA is of particular significance, I think, because if you look at the European continent and the UK, we've been in negotiations with the EU for a very long period of time, for about 2 decades or thereabouts. We were also in negotiations with EFTA, which includes 4 large prominent players, including Switzerland, with whom we have concluded. And we've also been in negotiations with the UK, with whom we have also concluded the negotiations, and we hope that the document will be signed and all the legal scrubbing would have been done, and then we can set about. Now, what this particular FTA does is, I think, threefold, because the first thing it does is that, unlike many of the other agreements, this is a very comprehensive and a high-quality document. And a high-quality document means that it covers over 90% of UK's exports and about 99% of India's exports. And so, in other words, it's very, very comprehensive. And so the potential for increasing the trade volumes would be very significant. I understand the trade volume is about 55 billion currently, and the intention and the hope is that it'll double by 2030. So that means a big deal for business communities on both sides, and it's a huge opportunity, particularly given that there is so much of uncertainty because of the tariff issues that are going around globally at this point of time. What this also does, secondly, I think is important, because although the EU negotiators don't wish to admit it, it is a very strong signal to the Europeans that it is about time that we conclude this particular negotiation, which has been dragging on for so long. And in other words, we need to have a forward-looking agenda, because unless we look at the situation from a situation where we are trying to expand the cake, just as, you know, with the UK, we are looking at doubling trade. With the US, as you know, the negotiations are hoping to increase it to 500 billion. So the EU also has the same potential. So I think the potential for our trade partners to tap into the Indian market and for us to tap into theirs will be enormous. And what this means is that we will now become much more plugged in with the global supply chains and the value chains, because a big part of this is also the technology collaborations, the investment cooperation that is going to happen because of this, and the potential is enormous. I'm also very happy that there is a particular aspect of social security, which has also been covered, I understand, in the negotiations. And we'll probably have an avoidance of social security imposition on Indian workers who go to the UK. And that is a big deal, because what it means is that the Indian workers will have a more competitive edge in going and working in the UK, just as the UK companies and economy will have an edge in having Indian workers over there. And in today's world, where mobility is a big factor and citizen governance is important, that is also a big deal. The other leg of this is the technology thing, but I think we can talk about that separately.
Right. And Ambassador Bhattacharya, may I also at this point to also understand the significance of Prime Minister's visit to the UK. For those of us who are curious, what kind of power does United Kingdom represent today? I mean, colonial power in the past to a modern day democracy, its sort of advances that it has made in the field of technology, in particular, sixth largest economy. If you look at per capita, it is way ahead of many countries. So what in current geopolitics, where does United Kingdom stand?
Well, the UK is certainly a major powerhouse. And it's a powerhouse not only in terms of its economic strength, as you pointed out, the sixth largest economy with a very high level of per capita income. London continues to be a major financial capital of the world. And over time, what UK has been able to do is to develop its expertise in the field of technology and innovation in terms of the knowledge-oriented sectors. And there is a normal congruence with India on that particular aspect. There is another thing that the UK is very important for, because although it's an island, it is in some ways reflective of some of the thinking that happens on the continent of Europe itself. And therefore, that particular world and that particular area, which is going to be a major focus in the emerging multipolar order that is emerging, will be a very important item for all of us as the days go ahead. And finally, I think in the strategic context, there is a certain combination that the US and the UK have, which is kind of embedded in history and culture. And therefore, although we do see a great degree of unpredictability coming from DC at this point of time. I don't think that's going to be something that's going to endure for forever. I do see that the trends that come from London and from Brussels in particular, which tend to moderate that particular aspect of unpredictability, is very, very important, so that there is a greater degree of understanding of the direction in which our global future is going to be decided. So in many ways, the UK is very, very important in the world of today.
Right. In a short while from now, Prime Minister Narendra Modi is about to reach London to begin his official visit to the United Kingdom. He'll have key engagements with the Prime Minister of the UK and also King Charles III. Professor Pant, if I can come to you, in your intervention, you mentioned about the manner in which UK has been trying to carve an identity of its own post-Brexit. And in that effort, what does India mean for United Kingdom? And then if you can bring in the FTA point that we were talking about, how is it transformative for both India and the United Kingdom?
I think, for India, the deal is very simple. We are in the process of negotiating a number of these bilateral agreements with a range of stakeholders. And in some ways, the conversation on FTAs has moved beyond just the economic logic of the partnership. It is now embedded in a certain degree of political comfort. So political and strategic ties are now in the driving seat. That comfort is now the driver of economic engagements across the world. And I think if you look at the number of countries that India has signed and is working towards signing these bilateral trade agreements, they are all key partners of India. So there is a political logic, there is a strategic logic now embedded in the economic engagements, and India certainly would be hoping that as it looks at UK as a partner, and as India-UK partnership has evolved into a comprehensive partnership across domains, and the irritants have been marginalized, this economic dynamism that has come in this relationship will be reflected in the FTA and will drive the economic relationship further forward, as was being discussed earlier, taking the numbers from somewhere, doubling the numbers over the next 5 years of bilateral trade. That's the ambition, and I think that's an ambition that is well rooted in the present structures of the two economies. I think in some ways for Britain the question has been a slightly trickier, because since Brexit, if you see the landscape of British economy, if you see the challenges that British economy has faced, and if you see the struggle that Britain has had in trying to forge a relationship with Europe in particular, of which European Union, of which Britain was a part of till Brexit, and then post-Brexit trying to carve out a new relationship. That is where the problem has been, that they have not been able to come to an understanding with Europe, and Europe in some ways wants to ensure that Britain and British policymakers understand what happens when you take as major a decision as Brexit. So I think for Britain, it's a question of forging a new identity post-Brexit. The global Britain idea of global Britain used to be the slogan for a very long time, that Britain would reach beyond European shores to economic partners everywhere, and I think it is
right. Professor Pant, I'll just interrupt you for a moment. Those visuals coming in from London. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has reached United Kingdom. Prime Minister Narendra Modi arrived in London just a short while ago. Those visuals of Prime Minister Narendra Modi, welcomed by the Indian High Commissioner to the United Kingdom, Vikram Doraiswamy. Prime Minister Narendra Modi on a 2-day visit to the United Kingdom. This is Prime Minister Modi's 4th visit to the UK. Those visuals that just came in a short while ago. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has arrived in London, United Kingdom, for an official visit. Prime Minister will be holding talks with his British counterpart, Keir Starmer, on the entire gamut of India-UK bilateral relations. He will also hold talks with King Charles III. Those visuals of Prime Minister being welcomed at the airport. Visuals coming in from London, United Kingdom. UK has a large Indian diaspora as well of about 1.8 million as per 2021 census. Forms about 2.6% of the total population of the United Kingdom. And Prime Minister Modi will also have an occasion to engage with members of the Indian diaspora. In these visuals, Prime Minister Narendra Modi being welcomed in London as he arrives on an official visit to the United Kingdom. Professor Pant, as we're looking at the visuals of Prime Minister Narendra Modi's arrival in London, his fourth visit to the United Kingdom, we're talking about the FTAs. What would be, according to you, other priorities for India in this visit?
Has spawned significantly across domains, and so I would think that increasingly UK's and India's security partnership, defence partnership, will be an important vector which will be part of the discussions. We are looking at UK trying to expand its footprint in the Indo-Pacific and ensure and work with like-minded partners a certain kind of stability and freedom freedom of navigation, the principles of freedom of navigation, and which are the principles embedded in India's worldview as well. I think those principles and working with India and other like-minded countries is something that Britain is trying to push forward with. So certainly, I think the broader Indo-Pacific dynamic, security and defense dynamic, but also I think education will be an important factor here. We are already witnessing a number of British universities trying to set foot in India. India has opened its higher education sector for foreign universities. A number of British universities are in queue to set up campuses here in India. I think this is going to be very, very important given the demand in India for high quality education, as well as the ambition in British universities to expand in the Indian market as they view it. So I do think that technology, defense, education, which are at the moment key drivers of this relationship, will continue to be part of this conversation that Prime Minister will unfold here, along with the discussions on the FTA.
Right. We're looking at visuals of Prime Minister Narendra Modi's arrival in London, United Kingdom. Prime Minister on a two-day official visit to the United Kingdom. This is Prime Minister Modi's fourth visit to the UK. Ambassador Sanjay Bhattacharya, from the perspective of people-to-people connect, how do you read the significance of Prime Minister's fourth visit to the UK? As I mentioned, the Indian diaspora is a vibrant one, as you would know. So 1.8 million and more. How they form a living bridge between the two nations?
Well, the umbilical cord is really provided by the diaspora, and it's an old one and a new one as well, because people have been from India have been in the UK ever since independence. That's when the initial waves of the diaspora went across, and many of them settled down and have established themselves in places of great repute, in politics, in business, in academics, and in medicine in particular. So it's quite a widespread diaspora. There are also certain elements within the diaspora which are what we may say as irritants, because some of the Khalistani elements have crept into the diaspora in the UK. There's also a number of economic offenders who are wanted in India. But overall, the diaspora has played a very significant and a very positive role in being the bridge between the two countries, in taking initiatives that bring the two sides together, and in championing the cause for even stronger bilateral ties. And they have actually participated in many of the projects, either from the UK side or within India as well. The diaspora has continuously grown and is widely respected. In fact, one of them even became the Prime Minister of the UK.
Yes. That's an interesting point. Rishi Sunak became the Prime Minister earlier. Professor Harshvardhan Pant, if I can come to you. Both of you mentioned about a certain irritants that exists as far as India-UK relations are concerned. In particular, the pro-Khalistani elements in the United Kingdom. In the recent past, we've also seen the manner in which they've tried to create a chaos in the United Kingdom. How significantly do you think it would feature in the talks between the leaders, as Prime Minister also perhaps would raise the issue of cross-border terror, as he's been doing post-Operation Sindoor? So these issues of extremism and terrorism, how do you think they would take center stage in many ways?
I think they will be a very important part of the conversation, primarily or because in some ways Britain in the last few years has seen a growth in Khalistani extremism, in other kinds of spaces that are available. They seem to have grown, and of course, in the context of cross-border terror and in the context of Pahalgam and Operation Sindoor, India would certainly be reiterating the fact that the opportunities and the space that is available at times to the Pakistani narrative in the British public space needs to be curtailed, and I think that has in the past been a much bigger issue than it is today. Today there is at the governmental level a great degree of convergence with the Indian worldview. Pakistan is no longer as central to British foreign policy worldview as it used to be. But the challenge of managing the narrative, the challenge of how do you curtail that space that is available to extremist groups, and we have seen the spurt of growth of Khalistani extremism in the last few years, unlike, say, the last decade. That needs to be brought back to focus, because you need to ensure that the agencies of both the countries are working together and understand the sensitivities around this issue. So I do think that these issues will be important. But what we have seen, for example, that compared to, say, a country like Canada, in the UK, we have seen greater sensitivity at the governmental level on this issue, and the British government has indeed taken cognizance of Indian point of view. Although the challenges remain, and those challenges will be reflected in the kinds of conversations that the Prime Minister will have during his time in the UK.
Right. Ambassador Bhattacharya, your take on the security dimension of the relations between India and the UK. And you also mentioned about the potential extradition of high-profile economic offenders that India would want back in the country. So from that perspective, this visit would also be very significant.
I think the security, particularly the issue of terrorism, will feature prominently. I think what happened in Pahalgam was atrocious, and the kind of retaliation that we had to do in terms of Operation Sindoor has been well appreciated by the policy circles in most capitals across, including in the UK. However, there is actually a very noisy and raucous diaspora element that seems to create an impression otherwise. And it is also true that the migrant community in the UK, as well as in several other countries, have become extremely assertive, and their degree of integration into the destination countries has been inadequate. And so they often create what you can say is trouble, and also foment trouble. So I suppose the idea of India of being firm about having zero tolerance on terrorism will be put across very solidly at the talks. And it is necessary for all countries to understand that they need to adopt such measures as well, because this is a global phenomena and a global threat. The second thing on terrorism that I think will probably come across is that about India's determination to not take this anymore without having retaliatory action, particularly against the terrorist groups and those who aid and sponsor terrorism. And that is very important, because it's important to understand that in some ways the state has become a sponsor of terrorism, and the army that it commands has been an abettor of this particular process. And I think that message will also be very forcefully put across to the British counterparts at this particular occasion. I think on the broader issue of radicalism, that's a broader debate, and I think that's something that will require much more of interfaith consultation. There's a deeper understanding of how radicalism, extremism, and violence actually go step by step and lead to chaos, and they seek to create chaos in civilized world. Now, the question of the economic offenders, I think this is something that we've been taking up with the British for a fairly long period of time, and they have always found certain loopholes in their laws to prevent the extradition of various people who are held, who are residing in the UK. In fact, it's a pity that UK has become a sort of a refuge for many of these economic offenders, not just from India, but from various other parts of the world as well. And perhaps the UK needs to reconsider the manner in which it looks at such people and their activities so that it comes out with a much cleaner slate.
Right. Professor Harshvardhan Pant, if we talk about the political developments in the United Kingdom in the recent years, it's just been over a year, I think, since the Labour government in the UK has returned to power. Before that, the Conservatives were in power for about 15 years. Just trying to understand what has been the legacy of India's engagement with these two different parties and different worldview that they share.
I think one of the biggest successes of India's in diplomacy in the UK has been that it has now become that India is today a bipartisan issue. Strong ties with India are a bipartisan issue. Both parties are equally invested in developing strong relations with India. If Conservatives, the Tories, have to be given their due. Because it started from the time of Prime Minister David Cameron, when he was the first one to come to India. And during his visit to India, he pushed back against Pakistan in India. And that, in some ways, changed the discourse about how closely aligned at times British policy was with Pakistan. And then, of course, the change of tone and tenor with regard to China debate in Europe and in UK. I think a lot of the questions that used to undermine India-UK partnership became marginal. So the Tory governments, right from the time of David Cameron to Mr. Sunak, have been invested in building strong relations with India. And unfortunately, Labour had been a bit lackadaisical. But what we saw in the last elections, that when Mr. Starmer was campaigning as a prime ministerial candidate for the Labour Party, he started changing the discourse on India as far as the Labour-based rank and file was concerned. He reached out to Indian diaspora in a big way. He made a play for Indian diaspora votes, knowing full well that there was a larger degree of sympathy vis-a-vis the Tories, given their background. And I think that in some ways has ensured a degree of continuity in India-UK ties after a long tenure of Conservatives to the Labour Party, to the present-day Labour government. And I think this is something that perhaps is very healthy, that India is now no longer a point of contestation among political parties. Though, of course, there are still these voices, these spaces available where we see, certainly pro-Pakistan elements within certain parties becoming very vocal. But I think by and large, if you see the strategic direction of India-UK relationship has been positive, and I think both parties remain committed to strong ties with India, particularly in the context of the post-Brexit space that UK is trying to find for itself in Europe, beyond Europe, and in the world.
Right, and Prime Minister Keir Starmer has been vocal about strengthening ties with India. Ambassador Sanjay Bhattacharya, at the top leadership level, Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Prime Minister Keir Starmer, what kind of a convergence do you see in their worldviews as they seek to steer the relations between the two countries in a historic new direction?
Well, we are in very interesting times. One is often tempted to say that this happens all the time, but these are particularly interesting. And I think a lot of that is coming out of DC. And I think in this particular situation, there is a need to actually hold the rudder stable so that there is greater predictability in the way ahead. There is also a certain kind of opportunity that both the leaders see in having or creating a brighter future for their citizens and for their nations. And I think both of them are very deeply committed in terms of their inclusive development and in terms of their advancement of the future-oriented progress that they wish to bring about. The third factor that comes about is that while we are very committed to our bilateral ties, which are very strong and we wish to make it even stronger, we still believe that we are part of the globalized world. And both the leaders are committed to that multilateral process as well as the global interlinkages. And that is where the strategic aspect comes in. And I think this is a very happy troika of congruences, which brings Prime Minister Modi and Prime Minister Starmer together as we seek a way ahead.
Right. Also, Ambassador Bhattacharya, when Prime Minister Narendra Modi meets King Charles III, would I be right to say that he would be one of the few leaders to have engaged with both the present King and late Queen Elizabeth?
Well, of course, since King Charles III assumed stepped onto the throne, this is probably the first visit that the Prime Minister's made after that, and so it is but natural that he's having this opportunity. The relationship between India and the UK is somewhat special, as we've been always mentioning. And it's not just the colonial past, but it's also the fact that just as we have embraced many of the British or Western practices that have come during their time and we have adopted and adapted to our needs, the Britain policies and their worldview has also changed enormously because of their interaction with the India of the past, as well as it is happening and unfolding, the India of the future as it is unfolding. And so I think in that particular context, although there is a certain formal part of it, the ceremonial part of it plays a very important role as well. And I think it would be a great occasion when the Prime Minister meets with King Charles III.
Right. Professor Pant, your thoughts on the symbolic significance and otherwise of Prime Minister Modi meeting King Charles III as and when that meeting takes place during his visit?
Well, I think it would be historic in some ways, in more ways than one. But I also think it shows and it captures the sense of India-UK partnership that it is embedded in history, but it also is able to reinvent itself with time. And I think the message that Prime Minister's visit will give out is certainly that India remains now ready to move beyond the old cliches of diaspora, empire, and etc. I think the idea that this is a new India, this is an India that is willing to engage with its close partners on the realities of 21st century, fully recognizing the fact that India and UK share a history which cannot be undone and which in some ways continues to shape our engagement, whether it is the diaspora, whether it is our cultural connect and historical connect. But I think moving beyond that, underscoring contemporary relevance and underlining that contemporary relevance, of course, you can then link it to the late Queen and then the present King, and how seamless the transition has been in Britain, but also in terms of India's own ability to engage and to maneuver with UK at a time of great turbulence, both for UK and for the global geopolitical and geoeconomic order.
Right, and that order, if we can reflect on, Professor Pant, these negotiations, the talks, the FTA are also taking place at the times of President Donald Trump's tariffs, each country negotiating their own respective deal. What kind of message does a deal like India-UK FTA send out to the rest of the world when there's growing protectionism that we see in the trends?
I think the message from two major global economies is that here are two big economies that are willing to induce certain predictability and certain sense of normalcy in their economic engagement, and that they are willing to work together to ensure that the gains of free trade are still shared amongst the countries, and that they are willing to stand up, to the kind of chaotic decision making that is happening, that is emerging out of Washington. So certainly this is a message of stability and predictability that the two nations want to induce, and that is why we are witnessing today countries which are now embedding their economic relationship within the larger context of how political and strategic ties are evolving, which is in some ways driving the economic engagement. So by and large, from both sides, the message is going to be that whatever may come out of Washington in terms of policy response, in terms of their the desire to reconfigure the global economic order, the two major economies like India and the UK here in this case are willing to work together to ensure that the kind of disruption that is emerging remains within bounds, and that the ability of these two economies to manage that disruption comes from their ability to work together and to produce a desirable outcome for both the nations, which in this case will be reflected to a certain degree in the FTA that might be signed during this visit.
Right. And Professor Pant, one of the aspects of the FTA, and even before that, the Migration and Mobility Partnership Agreement of 2021, which was meant to facilitate easy movement of professionals between India and the United Kingdom. How do you reflect on the significance of that pact? And in the FTA, I believe it is going to be taken forward and formalized.
I think that the Mobility Pact was a very important marker for India, that Britain is looking at India as a long-term bet, that this is not simply about market access. Of course, market access is important. Of course, market access creates new opportunities for businesses, which then induces political connect. But I think without the Mobility Pact, because of the role that professionals and the movement of professionals has played in nurturing this relationship in the last few decades, that confidence it would have been difficult to generate. And I think the fact that Migration Mobility Pact happened, it allowed India to think of a comprehensive strategic partnership with the UK in a way that perhaps would not have been conceivable without it. And I think that confidence is what brings us to this stage of FTA. That without that confidence, without that Migration Mobility Pact, it would have been difficult to generate confidence for this FTA, the momentum for this FTA. And I think the fact that had happened in 2021 allows us to now think more ambitiously about the long-term sustenance of each other's economies, long-term engagement with each other, and a desire to embed each other, in respective economic parameters. And I think that is why the Mobility Pact was so important, and that is why it in some ways is the foundation of what perhaps would be achieved during this visit.
Right. Let's move to another area of cooperation, education. Ambassador Sajjay Bhattacharya, some 170,000 students, we understand, are Indian students, are studying in the United Kingdom. Many perhaps are planning to study in the future. UK continues to be a very, very important and respected education hub. We also learn about many UK universities planning their campuses in India. In fact, the process has already started. How do you see this visit also giving further impetus to this kind of close engagement between India and the UK? And it's also transforming itself. It's not the traditional Indian students going abroad to the UK, but now the UK universities are also coming to India. It's a sifting sand in many ways.
I think this particular area has changed significantly ever since the implementation of the new education policy of 2020 started being unveiled. And the implementation of NEP has meant that India is now seen not only as a potential source for students going abroad, but also one in which they can become knowledge partners. And I think it's in that spirit that the institutions or quality institutions from various countries, particularly from the UK, are now establishing a presence in India. What this means for us is that the kind of technology innovation hubs that we were looking at in the past, which had to rely on our partnerships with education institutions overseas, can now actually be created within the country itself. And as you know, technology is going to be the biggest vector for development in the days to come. The second thing that it does is that it makes the kind of education that a lot of students aspire for much more affordable and accessible and much more within reach, because if it is within India, the kind of opportunities that our students will have will increase significantly. And also, just as we've seen in overseas campuses in different parts of the world, India will now become a magnet for students from other parts of the world who will also come to these universities, because these international universities don't look at only local students, but others. But perhaps most significantly, what it will do is to turn the education system, the pedagogy that we have, so that we can become much more relevant and competitive and much more in sync with the kind of modern thinking, so that we can create the generation of leaders who will lead us towards the future. And I think that particular initiative is now being realized and is unveiling itself in a very wonderful way.
Professor Pant, India as a knowledge partner, UK university setting up campuses in the country, what does it do to the future of education in India? How does it transform it in the manner that has never happened before?
I think there has always been this great demand in India for quality higher education. We have seen in the last few years some great initiatives by private players in India setting up universities and campuses and changing the way Indians experience higher education in India, primarily being led by the public sector in the past to gravitating towards more of a hybrid model where private players are increasingly playing a larger role. And in some ways that has allowed for greater diversity, greater of portfolio available to students and reimagining what higher education looks like in the 21st century. But I think now as we give space and as there is an opportunity for foreign universities entering and setting campuses in India, it scales up that possibility, because still what tends to happen in India is our externally oriented education system, where a lot of the middle classes send their kids abroad to study, is still very it caters to a very, very thin proportion of our population. Having campuses in India does two things. It allows India to build capacity in higher education, which in some ways in Indian higher education system has missed for the last few decades, where China has overtaken India. If you look at the rankings, if you look at the kinds of institutions of higher education that China has been able to set. So now, as we invite external players, I think there is a possibility of greater capacity build up from the bottom up, and I think that's great news in terms of the future of Indian higher education, Indian research and development initiatives. But also it allows for Indians from a wider socio-economic spectrum to avail and to think of new possibilities in higher education, which perhaps were not available to them, which were missing, which were only available to a certain elite section of Indian society. So I think it does several things. And in this particular case, given the role that UK plays in global higher education, it's a small country, but if you look at the higher education system, it's very powerful. It has an enormous soft power when it comes to education. And we have seen how Indians gravitate to UK for various reasons. I think having some of those universities set up campuses here, provide quality education here, also will drive up Indian higher education standards across the board, but it will also allow greater opportunities for a wider spectrum of Indian population, which perhaps is needed if we want to tap into the demographic dividend that we so desperately want to. And
Right.
given the kind of the changing nature of work and the changing nature of workplace that we're experiencing. So I think it works at multiple levels in India's case.
Professor Pan, just staying with that point of collaboration between education institutions that is taking place, Will this also lead or at least create a potential for convergence between latest research, development, innovation, technology development that we've been talking about, more convergence between what's happening in the UK and what's happening in India?
Absolutely, I think that would be the hope that we are not simply setting up campuses here because there is a demand and because there is a profit to be made by certain universities, but also I think the idea would be that this allows for greater synergization of effort when it comes to research and development, and I think that R&D potential that one needs to tap into and that one needs to encourage the sense of innovation and the sense of pure research that we want to encourage. I think that is something that that this kind of collaboration, this kind of engagement will allow us to think differently about. We still do that. I think that still happens between Indian institutions, British institutions, and world institutions. But that I think once you have institutions setting up their campuses here, that allows for a different kind of interaction, which perhaps is missing at the moment, where you have to go abroad and engage with select group of people. I think once you have the facilities, the infrastructure here in India, that osmosis that it allows both between the institutions and India in real time, that perhaps gives greater possibilities and that allows for greater possibilities to emerge. And that would be the intent, that ultimately this R&D collaboration, this research collaboration, this osmosis between different kinds of education environments that India and UK has, that will allow for greater technology development, greater new ideas, new innovation, and therefore, in its own way, a strengthening of a partnership that's already very strong.
Right. Ambassador Sanjay Bhattacharya, so you mentioned about the future of innovation and technology and where you see India-UK partnership really thriving. The two countries also share a technology and security partnership. If you could simplify for us, what does it really imply and the ways in which these countries can work together? We know that India is a startup hub, is the third largest ecosystem in the world. UK is also seen as a country that is advancing the cause of science and technology. What do you make of the partnership between the two countries?
Well, technology, as I was mentioning, has become the most critical vector for growth,
yes,
particularly for inclusive development. And so we started with the UK, what we call the Technology Security Initiative.
Yes.
And TSI, as we call it, was probably concluded last year, and there's going to be a review of it during Prime Minister's visit. It's focused on several areas because it has to be multi-sectoral, so that it looks at not only some of the areas that are important today, for instance, in the world of data and cyber, for instance, the world of biotechnology, but also looks at some of the future-oriented progress. And which are the areas of critical technologies, critical materials, so that we can continue to have an edge in the value chains that are being developed. Because today, just as we have supply chains in the real sector, we have value chains in the knowledge sector. And what India has been doing for a long period of time is to set up bilateral partnerships so that we have joint projects, to set up technology hubs, and then to lead them on towards innovation bridges, so that there is a connect between the institutions on the Indian side and the institutions on the foreign side. And with UK in particular, this is something that has gained great momentum. Some of the key areas that we are working on in the TSI include, apart from the cyber and the IT sector, something about materials and critical technologies, because this is something that is going to be very important as we move into the electronic age. The other area where we are looking at is biotechnology. Medicine and health is also a critical area. Energy is another emerging area. There is a partnership that is evolving between different energy centers, both on biofuels as well as on hydrogen. So we have a broad range of areas in which the TSI is working between the two sides. It has also been very heavily funded so that research does not have to wait for the availability of funds, because that often is a big constraint. And the advantage of this funding will now enable the scholars and the researchers to be able to focus more on their joint collaborative work.
We'll take forward our conversation on Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit to the United Kingdom. Professor Harshvardhan Pant, I understand that you have to conclude your participation in the program. Thanks very much for joining us in the program. Ambassador Bhattacharya, I request you to stay along with us for a little while longer as we expect more updates coming in from Prime Minister's visit. We're heading for a short break. There's more coming up.